quick intro, if that's all right with you, Dr. Ziegenfuss. Is that cool?
Sure, yeah, whatever. You're the boss.
I won't read it verbatim, but I just wanted to make sure we're all up to speed on kind of what we're dealing with today. So Dr. Ziegenfuss, for those of you that have not had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Ziegenfuss speak before, is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and researcher with expertise in exercise science, dietary supplements, nutrition, and sports performance. And he's the co-founder and chief scientific officer of the Center for Applied Health Sciences, which is what he's going to be talking about a lot today. He's past president of and a fellow of the FISSN, certified strength and conditioning specialist, and chair of sports nutrition and exercise science program at Huntington College of Health Sciences. In addition to publishing well over 35 scientific papers, 7 book chapters, and more than 600 articles, Dr. Ziegenfuss has been quoted in Scientific American and made presentations in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the dietary supplement industry. Because of his unique ability to connect the dots between dietary supplements, nutrition habits, and physical activity within academic, industry, and legal channels, Dr. Z is routinely sought after by top 25 print media and as a consultant to top supplement companies, raw material manufacturers, elite athletes, and high-level executives. Dr. Ziegenfuss is also a renowned scientific officer to the U.S. sports nutrition market, and his input has led to the creation of products that have currently graced the shelves of every major retailer in a dozen countries around the world, accounting for millions of dollars in revenues, which means probably a lot of the supplements and vitamins that I took this morning, Dr. Z had a hand in.
Maybe, I'm not sure about that. But.
And above all else, Dr. Ziegenfuss is a great guy. We're really excited to partner with him, and really excited for today's talk. And the format, as we did last time, for those of you that can join us, we'll have sort of an open Q&A at the end for sort of all things, any question for anybody, and then we'll have sort of a closed off student-only Q&A where sort of the bosses will leave and can be sort of more of an intimate Zoom environment with Dr. Z. So Dr. Ziegenfuss, the floor is yours. We really appreciate it, buddy.
Right on. Thank you, Dr. Stock, all the faculty and attendees. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today on a Friday afternoon. So let's get to it. Disclosures are important. So I do my best not to be biased, but I probably am, and we all are. We have those inherent biases that we're not even aware of. Part of what I do to pay my bills is I own my own research lab. It's the Center for Applied Health Sciences, as Dr. Stock just mentioned. I've owned that lab, although it was named a couple of different things and moved around since 2000. So it's been 21 years in the industry, and labs make money by doing research studies. And the research studies that we've been doing for 21 years are sponsored by people like GNC and Pepsi and Gatorades and so on of the world. So that's how I've been paying bills, along with some other endeavors that I'll get into. I also served as a scientific and legal consultant to a number of different companies over the past few years, decades now, gosh. And lastly, yeah, I've been fortunate to rub elbows with people who are very well connected and a lot smarter than me, so that we've been able to invent some ingredients and bring them to market. And so I get sales, royalties from sales of several patented ingredients that are sold worldwide. The bio that was just read is a little dated. I'll get to it in a second here. So what was my path? I mean, how did I start out? Well, in high school, I had an anatomy and physiology professor class. And it was a brand new offering. It was by the women's field hockey coach. And I just loved it. And I was pretty good at it. And she sort of said, you know, you have a mind for this topic. So maybe you should consider going to college, you know, and studying this. Maybe do sports medicine, maybe be a athletic trainer or a physical therapist. And at the time I was all set to go into the Air Force. I had taken the ASVAB test and qualified for every job. Almost every job, I was approached by the Navy to go to nuke power school and so on. And when I went to go actually sign the papers to go into the military, my jobs didn't come up. It was a very busy, apparently very busy recruiting day. So I said, well, come back, in a couple of weeks, and we'll get you whatever you need to do. And I changed my mind based on some input from my high school A&P teacher. And I decided to go to college, and I decided to study sports medicine with the intention of being either an athletic trainer or a physical therapist. Well, then I had another professor at Lock Haven, Jim Dolan, who was awesome. We all have those professors that we think are awesome. And he was an ex-phys guy. And I wanted to learn everything that he could, because I thought, man, if I would have known as much as this guy, I probably could have been a little bit better athlete in high school, or maybe even a better athlete now and be healthier and so on. So I decided to go to school for exercise physiology, and I went to Purdue. Again, and I spent 2 years there, and I'll get into the differences between a small school and a big school. But while I was at Purdue, I said, I don't really think I want to do a PhD. I want to teach. I really like teaching, because I was a teaching assistant at Purdue. And so I took a year off after my master's, and I taught for a year. And then I figured out real quickly that you can't really get a good teaching gig with a master's. So I needed to get a PhD. So I went back and I got my PhD, and that was at Kent State. I'll get into that down the road a little bit. And so I've been fortunate to publish some articles and book chapters, and I do, I'm an active reviewer, which is tough to get these days. Post-COVID area or peri-COVID area, solid reviewers for some academic journals. Currently, I'm a co-inventor on 5 patents, and hopefully more down the road. Largely what I've been doing research-wise has revolved around dietary supplements. This is something that's put out by the YLM sports science guy. He's very good. If you don't follow him and you have an interest in dietary supplements, make sure you dial him up on Twitter. I did modify this and add some things, because I think it's always hard to be cutting edge when you put out something like this. But I've studied a lot of these different supplements over the last 20 years. Recently, I've been publishing papers. It's so crazy, because this first one about creatine, myths, questions and misconceptions about creatine, as Dr. Stout knows, and we have a close friend and colleague, Dr. Joey Antonio, these myths and misconceptions about creatine, it's unbelievable. After 20 years or so of research in humans, or even more. I mean, I was studying creatine as my PhD. It was my PhD topic when I graduated from Kent, and that was in 1996. So from 1992 to 1996, I studied creatine supplementation. And the myths that were out then are still out now. So we just recently published a paper in JISSN. We were one of the first. The second pub here is kind of neat, because the whole CBD and hemp explosion has been happening over the last few years. We were actually the first group to publish back in 2020 a study that showed the effects of hemp, which was standardized for CBD, which was a bad word back then. Now it's only a semi-bad word. But showing that it may have potential benefits on improving sleep quality and quantity and so on. So that was a neat pub. And then the third one, we did some NAD, if you're following the whole sort of anti-aging or healthy aging or pillars of aging groups. We published a paper with Mike Roberts at Auburn showing that resistance training can increase muscle NAD concentrations. And then some other work that we did a little bit later on, looking at joint health. So what started out, and I'll probably repeat this, but my lab started out as an exercise physiology and sports nutrition lab, but it's really had to morph into looking at systems physiology and looking at everything from joint health and cardiometabolic health and cognitive health and so on, really to survive. So not to bore you, but I'm from a small town with one stoplight back in Pennsylvania, the Poconos. So I went to school at a place called Lock Haven University. It's a jock school, D2 for every sport except for men's wrestling, where it's D1, and it's normally top 20 for D1. And my bachelor's, as I mentioned, was in sports medicine, health sciences. But there was 2,500 students there when I attended, and it was a fantastic school. We had cadaver anatomy, believe it or not, at a school that size. So that was excellent. And again, some of my major professors were the ones that really sort of bit me with the bug to stay in this area in terms of studying AMP and also exercise phys. And I was active like a lot of you guys probably. I mean, I worked while I went to school as a student tutor on campus, and then I did some, during the winter, I would teach skiing at Tussey Mountain, which is actually where the Penn State racing team competes. And that was fun. Then I decided to take it up a notch and go to Purdue for my master's. And I honestly didn't like it at first. When everybody says, wow, where'd you get your master's from? And I say Purdue, they're like, oh yeah, engineering? No. MBA? No, those are great programs at Purdue, but that's not what I went for. I went for ex-phys, and I went from a school of 2,500 to 40,000, 35 to 40,000. I really had a tough time the first year. I really didn't care for it very much. It seemed a little impersonal because I was used to, again, small town kid, small town guy, blue collar family. No one ever went to college from my family. My mom didn't, my dad didn't, my aunts and uncles didn't. Nobody did. I was the first one to go. So they were like, what are you, nuts? You already went to school for 4 years. I thought you could come out and get a job making a whole ton of money. And I said, it's not the way it works. My major professors there were Dr. Sedlock and Chris Melby. I believe Dr. Melby is still at Colorado State. He's an excellent guy in terms of nutrition and exercise epidemiology. Great guy. And again, while I was at Purdue, I was a grad assistant. I taught some martial arts classes and ex-phys labs and some weight training classes. And so I really liked that aspect. I wasn't really into research at that point. Like most master's students, you get involved with a couple of projects, you help out friends who are in school getting their master's, but that's pretty much it, right? Or maybe not, but for me it was, and I decided I wanted to teach. So I took a year off before going to Kent. I'm gonna show you the timeline in a minute. I went to Kent because when I realized that I needed a terminal degree to get a better paying job, my interests at that time were weight training, and I was always basically an ectomorph guy. So I had a small frame and not an easy time putting on a lot of muscle at the time. When I graduated Kent, I was 154 pounds. So I was the reference male, man, 70 kilos. That was me. And but I went to Kent because there was a professor there named Peter Lemon. And Dr. Lemon was one of the first guys who published some papers that showed the protein requirement for an athlete or for someone doing intense resistance exercise was about double what the RDA was at the time, 0.8. So he was promoting, 1.4 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that was back in the early to mid 90s. And so that was great. It was an easier transition because I had already been at Kent. So this was, I had already been at Purdue. So I went from 40,000 to about 20,000. And so I liked that. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of great times at Kent and met a lot of really great people. And I taught again. I was, anatomy labs, exercise physiology labs, and so on. So this is sort of a timeline. So after I got my master's at Purdue, I went back to my undergrad at Lock Haven, and I taught for a year. I was able to grab a 1-year temporary spot, and I taught anatomy, physiology, exercise physiology at Lock Haven. And it was great. But I realized that, well, number one, that was a temporary position. And number two, again, I needed a terminal degree. So I decided to go to Kent, finished there in 96. And then as luck would have it, there was another 1-year spot back at the same place at my undergrad at Lock Haven. And so I did that again. So I had 2 years of teaching experience before I grabbed my first full-time position at Eastern Michigan, which was in 97. So that's my timeline. And at Eastern Michigan, boy, as a first year, tenure track, full-time tenure track guy, they rode me pretty hard. I taught 6 undergrad classes, 3 grad classes. I was doing research because by that time I liked research. I liked it as much as teaching, in fact, because I know that, the two can oftentimes complement each other, right? One can feed the other. I developed new courses because I saw some weaknesses in the curriculum. So I said, we need a course in, let's say, pathophysiology or so on. So I developed that course, or sports nutrition. I developed that course. And so quickly, when you're highly motivated and you're younger and you want to do work, they give you more work. They don't give you necessarily more revenue, more income, but they give you all the work you want, right? So I was named director of the of the Applied Physiology Laboratory and the coordinator of the exercise science program. And then I joined the IRB board at Eastern Michigan, and I joined an instructional excellence board so I could be a better teacher. So it was a busy time for me. And that was again in 97, 98, 99. And for all those efforts, my starting salary was $38,500 for those 2 semesters. So I had student loans to pay back from my undergrad, not so much from grad school, but from my undergrad. So I needed to work summer. So when everybody says, oh yeah, you know, those teachers and professors, they get their holidays are off and their weekends are off and so on. And that's of course not true. If you love what you do, you're never really off the clock. When you come home, you still have things to do or things you want to do. Similarly with weekends and holidays. So that $38,500 is, and again, that was back in, you know, let's say 97, 98, 99. But now one of my sons who goes to Kent State, interestingly, he's a construction science major. And that major, which I had not even heard of until a couple of years ago, at Kent State and elsewhere, because I know Dr. Stout's son also recently graduated with a construction science major. Those are amazing degrees, starting salary of, you know, 70 to 75,000 here in Ohio within 6 months of graduating. So it's just, I guess it just shows my age, but also that starting salary was barely enough to pay my bills. I was married at the time. My wife and I had our first son. This is a picture of a beginning of my life-changing events. So when you're a grad student, you worry about yourself for the most part, right? And then all of a sudden I got married out of my PhD. Now I'm a husband, and then we had our first son, and I'm a father, and I'm a provider and a protector. And fast forward over the next 10 years, and I have 5 kids and 4 dogs and 2 cats and 2 turtles. And over the last, you know, over the last decade, we've had iguanas and hedgehogs and hamsters and so on. But my sons are on the left. 2 of these guys, the 2 on the left, are at Kent State, believe it or not. They found their way there. This one is at a D2 school, Mercyhurst. He plays football there. My daughters they're in high school, and that's a challenge. Thank God I had sons first. If I would have had my daughters first, I'd have 2 kids. I wouldn't have 5 kids. That's my attempt at levity right there. But it's partially true. And these are my 4-legged kids, the dogs that we have, 2 German Shepherds and then 2 rescues. One of my other life-changing events that I'm pretty proud of is being invited and traveling to foreign countries. So when I was the president of ISSN, I was approached by this gentleman here. He's a physician. His name's Fabrizio Angelini. And he's a big shot in Italy in terms of endocrinology, but also sports nutrition. And so he organized, along with the ISSN, some conferences, and they've been going on for a long time now. And thankfully, I'm invited to Italy pretty much every year since that time, since '99. And I consider him a close personal friend, along with Fulvio Martesico, who unfortunately passed away suddenly a few years ago. But part of this evolution was being an invited speaker to different countries. It's once you get to sort of a leadership position in a professional organization, and you are invited to one country or one conference, it seems to be like dominoes, where you're invited to other countries and other conferences, as long as you do a good job, obviously. So in Italy, the phrase, you know, live to work versus work to live. We all know people who, you know, they get up and they hit the ground running. They're all about their job. They identify themselves with their job, and that's it, right? And then, you know, other people who are like, they're a 9-to-5er, and they just go to work. They don't really like it. They just work to live, right? So that was illustrated very clearly, sort of the combination. In Italy, for example, you know, if a conference is supposed to start at 8 a.m., it might start at 8 a.m. It might not. It might start at 8:30. And if it's supposed to end at 4, it might end at 5. They're just laid back. They're a lot more laid back in Italy. And at first I was put back by that. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, what time does my presentation was supposed to start 25 minutes ago, and so on. So it's been a nice evolution between figuring out those differences. You know, smelling the roses, I guess, is one of the phrases that I like to think of there. This is a picture, boy, this is when my 25 hydroxy vitamin D levels were about 20, I think. This was in 1998. So I was at Eastern Michigan. I was a professor, tenure track professor, and I happened to go to the Arnold Classic Expo. Again, Dr. Stout's been there many times, and it's an interesting experiment in sociology and psychosociology to see the competitors and the attendees in terms of, on the one hand, extreme dedication and discipline, and on the other hand, extreme insecurity and narcissism. But I was walking around the expo trying to find companies to sponsor research. And I had my business cards and so on. And I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman named Mel Rich. And he had a big booth space, kind of like back in the days with EAS. He had one of the largest booths there. And he was nice enough to take my card and then talk with me for 10 or 15 minutes. And that was really my introduction to legitimate companies in the sports nutrition space that actually wanted to sponsor research on their products. Because let's be honest, those companies that sponsor research on their products are far and few in between. And here was one of the first guys who I met, who said, you know what? Here's my card. Here's my number. If you ever need a job, call me. And that call happened in 1999, and you'll hear about that in a second. Unfortunately, with high-level scrutiny, when you work in the dietary supplement industry and you do research in the area of any kind of weight loss or hormone boosters, I did some andro research back in 1998, 99, back when androstenedione and androstenediol and the 19-nor isomers were out there and so on. And of course, that led to sort of a litany of lawsuits and so on. And I was called in as an expert witness to testify and so on. And so admittedly naive to the process. I'm just going to go in there and tell the truth. Here's what I did. Here's what I found and so on. And boy, that is not how the legal system works. My advice to anybody who's asked to provide legal testimony is to have a lawyer who is looking out for your best interests as well. I'll leave it at that. Something I'm pretty proud of is when I went back to Lock Haven after my master's, I wasn't a Doogie Howser by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, supposedly he was 14 when he was a physician and a surgeon or whatever. I was 24, but I was still putting people to sleep at Lock Haven, teaching anatomy and physiology and exercise phys. So that was kind of cool. They called me Doogie. While I was there. I'm pretty proud of the fact that, and again, this led to a lot of doors opening for me as being the president of ISSN. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of professional athletes, mixed martial arts. I've consulted with Juventus. I forgot to bring it, but I have a jersey signed by Ronaldo before he left recently and went to Manchester United. AC Roma, we work with the Browns, the Steelers, the Jags, the Dolphins, and the Maple Leafs. And this was one of the presentations we gave to the Jags. And we didn't renew our contract with the Jags, not because we didn't like the coaches or the players or anybody there. This was a while back. This was actually, if you remember, the Jags were rotten and then they were good for a couple of years and now they're kind of rotten again. I'd like to think that part of the reason they were good for a couple of years is that we gave them a lot of good advice in terms of nutrition advice. But it was not a well-paid, let's just say it's not a well-paid endeavor, because everybody wants to work with a professional athlete. And a lot of people in this space will do it almost for free, just to say that they've worked with high-level, Olympic level or professional athletes. So beware of that. And then the other thing to recognize is, there's a difference between where we sit as scientists, where we typically look at, let's say, group responses. We look at, 50 people or 20 people. And if we say, most of these lines are deflecting upward, showing that this intervention probably has a likely beneficial effect. Whereas a coach might not look at any of these. Maybe these guys are third stringers and second stringers, so he doesn't care. Coach only looks at the first stringers, athlete A, B, C, and D, and he's like, well, okay, so I'm going to use this intervention. Let's say it's fish oil for concussion prevention or creatine for strength and speed and size. For athlete A and B, he'd use it, and for C, it wouldn't matter, and for D, he wouldn't use it. So these are the kinds of conversations that you have to be ready to have if you want to work with sports teams. Around that same time, where the sports teams didn't want to pay, and that's actually something I forgot to mention, but the reason we didn't renew with the Jags was because the pay really, it barely covered our costs. So we had to do what we call the Charlotte Shuffle from Cleveland to Jacksonville because there was no direct flights at the time. Now there is, but there wasn't when we were flying there. So we had to always connect in Charlotte. And those are those flights where you have like a 30-minute layover. So God forbid your plane is late at all because you have to travel to Concord, literally like running through the airport with your suitcase, trying to catch your connection. So we called it the Charlotte Shuffle. And at the same time, they're not really paying you very well at all. So really the profit really didn't match the effort, I guess. But at the same time, there are some companies out there, when you have expertise in the area of nutrition or food chemistry or dietary supplements, bigger companies that value science, they are willing to pay particularly well. And these are not the new companies. These are typically the companies that have been around for a long time. So on the one hand, sports teams don't want to pay really anything because they're already paying inordinate amounts of money to their coaches and their players. So they don't really pay their advisors very well. But some of the larger sports nutrition brands will. And then in 1999, the end of 1999, I took a chance, and my teaching load was increased. And I remember walking into the temporary. I came in under one dean, associate dean. He left and was promoted. Department head, excuse me. The department head was promoted, went to associate dean. Went into the newly appointed department head, who was younger than me at the time. And I said, hey, I've got 2 more preps here, brand new, and I've been here for almost 3 years. What's the deal there? Because that's not how I was brought up. I'm a graduate coordinator. I'm writing courses. I'm doing research. Nobody else is doing that. I'm doing all that. And he said very simply, he goes, do you have a contract that says you're only going to teach 4 classes a year? If you don't, tough. You can leave if you want to. Boy, I was hot. I left there shaking. I was shaking. And I grabbed that business card from Mel Rich that I had met at the Arnold Classic, and I called him. And that night, he offered me a job. He offered me a job for double what I was getting paid at Eastern Michigan. And that was obviously very risky, but that's exactly what I did. I left Eastern Michigan, started my own lab, and that was in 2000, January of 2000. And it's 21 years later, and one of my crown achievements is the Center for Applied Health Sciences. This is a current picture. It's actually our 3rd or 4th location in Northeast Ohio. We are what's called a contract research organization, so CRO, and we are small because we don't have a dozen or 2 employees. We have about half a dozen, 6 to 8 employees, but we specialize in completing trials very quickly. So we're very engaged, and we have a number of advisors that are basically my scientific colleagues over the last 20 years. I have colleagues from, as I mentioned, Auburn and Baylor and UNC, overseas. I have all kinds of, that's the network that as students, you need to work hard to put into place now, so that you plant the seeds of your network now so that they will flower, hence the picture of of planting the seed back here. Plant the seed now so that it can flourish down the road. And basically what we do is we're trying to help substantiate the safety and efficacy of dietary supplements, but also functional foods and medical devices. We offer mostly what we do, about 90% of what we do is clinical trials, but we also are active in product development. Sometimes we have a company that comes to us and says, listen, we're a startup. We want to put together half a dozen different products. We'd like your scientific input because we know you've been in this industry for a long time. So we provide some input on new product development. Sometimes we're retained by companies to do seminars or sales training. So let's say it's GNC and they want to teach their staff about some of their top selling products, differences between, whey protein and casein protein and plant proteins and so on, or differences between the different kinds of creatine out there and being sold, or multivitamins or fish oil and so on. We do that. We also do podcasts, we do media, radio, and TV. But what I like to remind everybody is our credo is you're never too important to be nice to people. And I think that's lost today with a lot of what's going on in the industry. This is sort of a snapshot of the kind of studies that we've been doing over the last 10 years. I actually brought on a physician. His name's Dr. Hector Lopez. He's probably the smartest guy that I've met in person in terms of his ability to connect the dots between, let's see, nutrition, molecular biology, physiology, medicine, and so on. I was lucky to meet him. Met him at the ISSN conference about 12 years ago, brought him on board as a partner about 10 years ago. And so with that, we've been able to do all of these other kinds of studies: cardiovascular health, immune function, GI and digestive health is big for us right now. You'll see we have a couple of studies, a few slides down the road I'll show. Cosmetic health is big, beauty from within, the whole idea of maybe it's not just creams that you put on the outside of your face and your body, but maybe it's certain vitamins and minerals and herbs that you take, that you ingest to promote beauty from within. Brain health and so on, but we still maintain our roots of ex-phys. So we do, VO2 peak max, strength power stuff, muscular endurance, speed, agility, reaction time. Weight loss is big. We have a DEXA, we have a bod pod, and we have a bioimpedance spectroscopy system. So we can do 4C. We can do muscle biopsies, and we've done tracers with Dr. Arnie Ferrando and Bob Wolf. So we're able to do amino acid metabolism using stable isotope tracers and so on. So it's been fun. With some of our current studies, we have a weight loss study going on, an anti-aging study where we're looking at some of the pillars of aging. Blood sugar, that's big. A lot of companies are approaching us now that with subjects who have prediabetes, and they're trying to sort of prevent the evolution from or the subjects from going from prediabetes to type 2s. There's always thermogenics out there, all these companies out there that want to say get more energy and burn more fat. So we grab those. A joint pain study, we actually have two. We have a joint pain study that's 6 months long, and we also have a study in postmenopausal women where we're looking at DEXAs every 6 months, and that's a 2-year study. We also have a hydration study that we're going on right now where it's comparing water to a water plus electrolyte solution. So this is a snapshot of in our lab, actually, how we try to recruit subjects. So when a subject walks in the door and they're there for some other study, they can look up at this board and say, wow, this is the other stuff that they're currently recruiting for. And one of the things I wanted to bring up here is the compensation differences between a CRO like ours and university, right? Because my understanding from Dr. Stout and others is that the IRB doesn't really look too favorably upon these amounts of compensation, whereas in the independent CRO world, we can offer that, especially if we're doing invasive procedures like muscle biopsies, where subjects can make $500 to $750 per biopsy. And if we're doing 2 or 3 or 4 biopsies, that's a pretty good, that's not bad. So a couple of things that I'm excited about in terms of recent partnerships is a company called Opsis Health. This is crazy. So the gentleman who's the CEO, his name's Kevin Grundy, and he actually was a previous employee of Steve Jobs. So he's an engineer, and he's been working on this project for the last 3 years. And what it is, it's you use your phone, you download the app and you use your phone to take a 4-second video of the food that you're about to eat. So let's say it's a salad, and I'll show you that in a second. And it does some 3D imaging and then math that's way above my pay grade to determine all the ingredients and all the macro and micronutrient contents. In addition, this company is trying to reduce greenhouse gas emission, so it gives you those calculations as well. So for example, here's an example of a scan of quinoa and avocado salad with prawns and spinach, and I just snapshotted the minerals, but you can see the eco rank here, and that's based on greenhouse gas emission. But here's an example of what it can do. So it takes this salad and it breaks down the lettuce in terms of the macro and micros, and that goes what kind of dressing is on there. It's vinaigrette, and it breaks down macros and micros, and for the strawberries and the blueberries and everything. So This is in its sort of final, it's not yet commercially available. It's in its sort of final stages of R&D. But I think when you live in a world like we do, where you do a weight loss study or you do a resistance training study, and you ultimately have to do your 3 or 4 or 5 day food records, we found that those are incredibly inaccurate potentially. They're a nightmare sometimes. I mean, it's rare to have subjects, the majority of subjects who are really, really good at filling out their 3 or 4 day food records. So this would take something like MyFitnessPal, for example, to town. This would be way better in terms of the accuracy and reliability. And that's where this company is headed, OPSIS. So I'm happy to be one of their scientific advisors. We also partnered recently with a company called Diagnostic. And this is a company that basically is looking at epigenetics. So they're measuring changes in DNA methylation and gene expression to understand how physical activity and nutrition and stress and drugs and so on and everything else you can think of might impact the existing algorithms of disease. So they have these, they're called clocks, epigenetic clocks, the Horvath clock and some other clocks that are out there. So I have my brother-in-law is a fireman. He's a deputy chief now, and he's a couple of years younger than I am, but he doesn't look like it. And I love him like he's my real brother. And he's like, dude, it's not the age, it's the mileage. So the mileage meaning the epigenetic stress that he's had to deal with over the last 20 years of his life as a firefighter. Exposure to environmental stress, exposure to smoke, disordered sleep patterns, wacky eating patterns, and so on. So that's the idea of epigenetics, and we have a long way to go, obviously, to understand that. But that's an exciting partnership. I have about 10 more minutes, I think. So if it's cool, I wanted to show you a couple of differences between what I do and what is typical at the university. So the differences between university research and contract research organization or CRO research. We have more than half of the time when we are approached by a sponsor, one of the concerns they have is for credibility, because universities tend to have better credibility. University research tends to be held in a higher regard than independent CRO research. Fair point. That's one of the reasons why we tend to collaborate with our university research partners lately, so that we can have both. So if we publish a paper, we can say, yeah, we collaborated with Auburn University on this paper. The data were collected here in Ohio, but some of the analyses on blood or muscle were done at the University of Arkansas or at Auburn and so on, and we collaborated. So that tends to mitigate any concerns that sponsors might have. And then is it a real credibility issue, or is it a perceived credibility issue? Because sometimes some of the CROs are doing better work than maybe some of the tier 2 or 3, not R1 institutions necessarily, but some of the lower level institutions that tend to charge a lot, have a lot lower price tag than getting something done, let's say at Harvard. So, and then there's this argument, it's been out there a long time, but those studies are funded by supplement companies. So this was actually a quote by Alan Aragon, who's been in the industry for a while. And he basically points out that you can't dismiss the research based on the funding source. That's a bias to begin with, because if you do that, then you need to be consistent and dismiss all the research on, meat, fish, eggs, potatoes, you name it. Dismiss the Atkins Foundation, all the other low carb groups. Dismiss all the pharmaceutical research, because who does that? The pharma companies do that. I say judge the science, not the sponsor, and let the science stand on its own merits, right? Look for a good research group that's been published for many years and so on. But that's something that we run up against a lot. I think it's a little misguided. Costs between the university and an independent CRO. Direct costs tend to be cheaper at the university versus a CRO, but indirect costs, because the university always wants a piece. Your department wants a piece, your school wants a piece, maybe the administration wants a piece, and so on. So those are indirect costs, and you can get creative. I know Dr. Stout is creative at that, and and also a couple of other universities that get creative at that. And that's largely, that creativity stems from sponsors pushing back and saying, listen, I'm not paying 55%. If a study costs, let's say, 50 grand to do, but you're going to charge me 75 because of indirect costs, and I'm not going to do it with you guys. So that's one thing to consider. IRB, though, you'll see here at the very end, tends to be much, much quicker for independent CROs. I know, like, for example, until this year with COVID, we could get IRB review and approval for 90% of our studies within 2 weeks, done. Now it's more like 3 or 4 weeks, but I know that at most large institutions, it's many months. Like at Kent, for example, the IRB only met once a month, and then no study is ever approved upon first glance. It's always sent back for some edits and clarifications and revisions. So that's another month, and so on and so on. So one of the benefits of operating in a CRO from a sponsor standpoint, like, hey, I want to get this study done on my product. I'd like you to give me a proposal and a bid. Part of that proposal and the bid is how fast can you do it? We're always faster than any university, with the exception of some smaller universities that aren't really set up to do research studies. They tend to be pretty cheap and pretty fast, but we're always fast, wicked fast. And then there's the credibility of the research group. Like, I did a couple of studies when I was a professor at Lock Haven, and people might scratch your head and say, where is that? I didn't even know they did research there, versus, let's say, Harvard or Yale or Stanford. Does it matter? Sometimes it matters. Sometimes it matters a lot. It depends on the sponsor and what they want to use the research for. To make claims, to justify claims. Like, let's say you have a multivitamin and you want to make a claim on the multivitamin for an advertisement that your multivitamin helps increase energy throughout the day. Well, you have to show that in a study, and it has to be a statistically significant difference between the two groups, so a placebo-controlled double-blind design, and it has to be done at a competent and reliable research institution. And that's it. So that's for the lawyers to bang around. Are there only 100 competent and reliable research institutions? Probably not, because there's over 3,000 colleges and universities in the U.S. And then there's things to consider, right? I mean, if you're doing a study and this is a classic one for hormone boosters. You take a bunch of little old men who have very low testosterone levels, and you give them a supplement or a product, and you boost their testosterone levels by 50%, but then you market it to 19-year-old kids. That's a no-no, because your subject characteristics, your study should mirror the target consumer, right? You can't do a study in one age group or one kind of subject and then generalize those results to others, right? That's a big no-no. Intellectual property. This is, I think Bill Gates said this, maybe intellectual property has a shelf life of a banana. I have 5 patents. They're good for 20 years. I can tell you with certainty that the really big companies, the whale companies that are billion-dollar companies, they want patent protection for any ingredient or product that you bring to them and say, hey, here, this stuff is really good. This ingredient is really good. I think you should consider it. Well, what are the claims I can make? Number one. Oh, you can say this, this, and this. Is it patented? That's number 2. It's always number 2. So if you're thinking about going into this work, become familiar with intellectual property and don't use borrowed science. That's the classic. Like, hey, green tea has been shown to increase fat oxidation. Well, we put green tea in our fat burner, and now we're going to say that our fat burner, that our thermogenic supplement increases fat burning. But they didn't test their product. They didn't test what's in their bottle. They didn't test anything. They just put green tea in there, and that's called borrowed science. They borrowed the science that was already done on green tea as an ingredient, and they just stuck it in their bottle, and now they're using borrowed science to make their claims. That's also a no-no. IRB I already mentioned, but at the university, IRBs are free. At least they used to be, right? We pay for them. Whenever we have an IRB application reviewed, the fee structure, it's gone up actually over the last couple of years, but it's between $3,000 and $5,000 bucks. It's a much quicker turnaround typically. They also want to review every questionnaire you have. Let's say you're doing an SF-36 and you're doing some visual analog scales for indices of affect. Each one of those documents that's a separate fee. That's normally $300 to $400. So if you have 5 questionnaires, that's 5 times $300. That's an extra fee that's tacked on. When you close a study, that's an extra fee that's tacked on. So I remember one of the first times I saw a budget when I was working in the industry. It had like 10 grand for IRB fees. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. There's no IRB fees because I was used to the university model. Well, there are IRB fees and they can be substantial. Rights to present and publish is a big one, the difference, because typically at most universities, the PI in the university, the principal investigator, they reserve the rights to present and publish. Whereas an independent CRO, they use the pharma model. The pharma model is essentially the sponsor owns the data. And if the sponsor wants to publish the data after the project's over, then that's their call. Whereas at a university, you go, hey, whether it works, doesn't work, or something weird happens, we still want to be able to present the data because it's important to get out there in terms of building the body of knowledge. On the CRO side, again, the pharma model says sponsor owns the data. So the other difference probably is, I'm not sure at the university, but it used to be that if you wanted to write up a paper, a manuscript, that was part of the original grant fee, whereas in the independent CRO, since the decision on whether or not to publish is made later, that's a separate fee that's added later. Other things, typically in a lot of labs at the university, the data are being collected by grad students, undergrads, whereas at CROs, we actually have research assistants, lab techs, RNs, sometimes MDs. You should consider the size of the study. If you want to compare apples to apples, ask for a per subject cost. How much does this project cost per subject? Protocol development fees is a big one. I'm sure you guys have gone through the senior level professors here. You're asked to do a proposal and you put a lot of work into this proposal and you give a lot of your intellectual capital, let's say, a lot of ideas. Hey, I think you should measure this. I think you should do that. And have you thought about this design? Let's do a crossover, not a parallel groups design. And then the company says, thank you very much. And then they go somewhere else but they use it's your protocol. We used to charge for that. I think we should all charge for that. It should be, hey, you need to cover at least my hourly fee for protocol development, or a flat fee. Like it's going to cost you $1,000 or $2,500 or whatever. Because otherwise these companies, some of the companies will get very good, basically consulting kind of advice for free because they'll place the study somewhere else. So another big difference is most universities, the subject pool tends to be students and grad students. At CROs, we don't have that luxury. So we grab everyone from 18 to 80. Timeline for completion can be different. Our final reports are different. We don't do a full manuscript write-up. We do a biostatistical report. So we write an abstract and we provide the biostatistical report, but we do not write up a manuscript because that's a separate animal. A lot of people want to, if something goes in a good way, if a sponsor has a good result from a study, they want to get at, okay, what can we say about this? When can we use it for marketing, advertising? And of course, as you know, if you have a company that brags about a study before it's published, then you can't publish it because the data are not new, they're not novel. Because when you publish a manuscript, you have to check a little box that says the data set here, this paper has not been appeared anywhere else, it's original. But if a company has been using it in commercials and advertisements, it's not original, so they can't use it. So you have to be creative in terms of what you can say, when and where you can say it. And typically what we do is we go, hey, let's present these data, this project at a conference first as an abstract. That gets the abstract, at least in the public domain, and then they're able to say something while in parallel, you're writing up the manuscript for publication. We also like to be very careful of what can and cannot be said in press releases because sometimes companies are, they take a little too much, let's say, creative liberties. I'm going to finish up here. What do I find interesting right now? Listen, I'm a sports nutrition guy from the very beginning. I still train during the week, not on the weekends so much, but I'm still really into all the protein and amino acids research, creatine research, beta alanine. I have a patent actually on an ingredient blend to reduce the paresthesias from beta alanine, so you can take higher doses. I've been talking about it for years, but now it's actually out on the market. I think betaine is very interesting, in particular, not just for strength and power production, but for women and the potential benefits on body comp. But now I'm, again, into cardiometabolic health and cognitive function because I'm getting a little older. And the whole omics thing is just incredible to me. Looking at the various disciplines for multi-omics and how to integrate and interpret the data so that eventually you get a systems biology approach where you can provide precision medicine. We're not there yet, obviously. It may not even be within my lifetime, but I suspect we're going to make some pretty large, substantial strides in the omics integration. So I'm going to keep my eye on that. And lastly, I like to put this in because I think it's helpful for maybe for the grad students and the undergrad students. What would I have said to myself 20 years ago? Number one, find your purpose, something you love to do, right? It's been said a million times. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I think that's a pretty good quote. Secondly, the secret is in your routine. You have to establish a certain routine. Hope Dr. Stout doesn't mind, but we're on a text thread and it's about 4:30 every morning when the texts start to rip through my phone, because he's up ready to train at 4:30 a.m. He has a routine set and it's worked wonders for him. So get a routine set and stick to it. Strive for multiple revenue streams. In the past, you have this job, you make money, you earn money. Then you spend the money that you earned, right? You make it, you spend it, you make it, you spend it. If you have multiple revenue streams or you make money and then the money that you made, use that to make you more money. That's a different mindset. And that's something you should consider. Establish your trusted network as soon as you can. All your friends and colleagues at the university and elsewhere. I mentioned it earlier, plant the seeds of your future now. You never know who you're going to rub elbows with 15 years down the road. And you go, wait a minute, I think I met you at a conference at UCF, or we were in a class together, whatever. That sort of kindred spirit goes a long way in terms of trust. And who knows, it could pay huge dividends for you down the road. And then finally, we know what we're good at and we know what we're not good at. Try to address those things you're not good at. And don't be afraid to get out over your skis. Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable, because when you're uncomfortable, that's normally when you learn the most, right? And so I want to thank you for your time today, Dr. Stock, for inviting me, and everybody else who hopefully is not looking like that guy. My staff and my partners, my friends and my colleagues, and in particular my family, which is my crown achievement. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Z. We appreciate it. And Dr. Stout has been here laughing about the 4:30 a.m. text thread. So that was really cool. That was really good. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on is because I think it's really important to get a variety of different perspectives, and we have a lot of PhD students that are interested in a variety of different paths, and so it's really cool to hear from someone that sort of took a little bit of a different non-traditional path than some of the rest of us. So thanks a bunch. We really appreciate it. We'll open it up now for any questions.
Well, first I want to tell everybody that one of our recent PhD students was hired at 10.
Yeah. Dr. Z, did you hear that? That's one of the things that I left
No,
out.
I didn't.
One of the things that I failed to leave out of the bio was your work with Mike LaMonica.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Mike LaMonica got his PhD obviously at UCF, and he's our superstar, senior research guy right now. And he's doing an excellent job and getting exposure to a lot of projects that he wouldn't normally get exposure to in a classical, exercise science facility. We're doing some gut health work, and we're doing some joint health work, and so on. So yeah, Mike's great. He's a tireless worker, although he's more tired than usual now because he has a 4-month-old son named Luke that doesn't sleep very much.
Oh, boy.
I have just one question.
Jeff,
Really,
Jeff has a question.
how many studies, like a percentage, where he shows no effect versus a good effect? Like how many studies does a percentage does he do that doesn't support the claims?
Okay. Tim, did
I
you hear
got
that?
it. Yeah,
Question?
I got it. So in the past, that number would have been around, I'd say 80% of the studies failed in terms of the sponsor, right? They wanted to be able to, they had high hopes to make certain claims, and we do the study and it just didn't work out. Over the past, I'd say 5 or 8 years, we tend to coach some of these sponsors prior to engage, or we just don't engage with those sponsors. We say, these guys are out of their mind. I mean, I'm not just going to take their money and do a study when I know there's no chance of this being different. There's no way, there's no chance. So we just tell them that up front. We say, listen, if you want us to do the study, we'll do it. But we have a pretty good suspicion that this is going to be money you're just throwing away. So that's helped to reduce the number a little bit, but it's still less than 50% of the studies that we do actually ever make the light of day, because again, the sponsor owns the data don't come out the way the sponsor wants. And then, okay, we got to, it's like we're a hunter and, you know, we only eat what we kill. So we have to go out hunting again. Right. So no pressure. You guys do, you know, you put in your grant proposals. It's a kind of a similar analogy. We have to go out and find new sponsors and so on to court or to interact with at conferences and trade shows and so on, who have either innovative ingredients or they're science-based in terms of their marketing and advertising. And then we approach them and say, hey, it looks like you guys are in the top tier of what you do and what you say, you're responsible and so on. So it really depends on the partner. Yeah. But it's always less than 50%.
Very cool.
So I was just going to point that out, that it's very high risk for companies to fund universities because we're obligated to publish the research regardless.
Bingo.
And so that's why it's almost, I think, a good idea for companies to at least do pilot trials to see if a protocol works at a CRO. And in fact, all of the Celsius research we've done in the past was based on a pilot study that Dr. Ziegenfuss did at his lab.
Right on.
And the companies felt more confident. And I think the reason there's a perception that universities, are more legitimate is because we have to publish everything. So, because we publish studies, unfortunately, for some companies that didn't show anything.
Right. It used to be, remember back in the day, you know, EAS was a great company when they first started because they would do exactly that. You know, their flagship ingredient was phosphagen HP, which was creatine monohydrate, and they published studies showing efficacy. And but then they followed up with a bunch of other products and they funded research, but those products didn't really, you know, they paled in comparison and they didn't work a lot of times, and they published them anyway. And that led to, you know, a lot of consumer awareness of, hey, this is a legit company. If I'm going to buy anything, if I'm going to buy any kind of vitamin or mineral or protein powder, I'm going to get it from these guys because they're not liars, they're not cheaters. And you don't see a lot of companies nowadays doing that, publishing null findings. You know, they'll only publish the ones that are good. And that's one of the criticisms of, you know, against CROs is that, oh yeah, everything they publish works. Well, yeah, because if it doesn't work, the sponsor owns the data, and then you know, they don't want to publish. One of the ways we push back on that is we say, hey, let's collect all the safety data we possibly can, because that way, even if you don't have anything to make claims for efficacy, at least you have safety data, which is important. So,
Yeah, great points. Great points. All right. Other questions? Any other questions? This has been interesting. I think those of us that are engaged in grantsmanship and IRB, you know, we could sit here and talk and probably complain about things all day. But if there's no other specific questions related to some of the content CRO type stuff, I think now would be kind of a nice time for us non-students to log off and have all the students that are on turn your camera on, if appropriate. and have a little Q&A with Dr. Ziegenfuss about, things that may be relevant to you as a student, or maybe thinking about doing a PhD or thinking about the job market. I know we have a lot of people that are in different spots. So don't be shy, students. Introduce yourselves and have some time to ask questions. Tim, I'm going to log off. We're going to log off. Thank you very, very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks a bunch.